Los Angeles, 1972. There is a restaurant on the west side of the city that does not advertise, does not take reservations through any service that would publish its name, and does not appear in any guidebook that tourists carry. It exists because a small number of people who require the specific luxury of not being recognized have decided collectively that it should exist, that their patronage is sufficient to keep it alive, and that its continued existence depends on its continued obscurity, which depends in turn on none of them ever mentioning it by name to anyone who might mention it to someone else. The tables are small. The lighting is low. The menu is handwritten and changes daily. The staff has been selected not for their knowledge of wine or their ability to describe the provenance of ingredients, but for their ability to see a face they recognize and respond as though they do not recognize it, which is a skill more rare and more valuable than any sommelier certification. On this particular evening in 1972, the restaurant is doing what it does on all its evenings, which is providing the specific quality of anonymity that its regulars pay for without ever paying for it directly. And at the corner table farthest from the door, John Lennon is having dinner with Bruce Lee. And the evening is exactly what both of them came for, which is nothing, which is the specific luxury of nothing happening, which is the rarest thing that either of them can purchase with any amount of money or reputation. Outside, Los Angeles is doing what Los Angeles does at night, which is continue, indifferent to the two men at the corner table, indifferent to everything, as cities always are, as this one is, as it will be long after this evening has become only the story of itself. There is no sign outside the restaurant. There has never been a sign. The people who need to find it, find it. The people who do not need to find it, do not. This is the entire operational philosophy of the establishment, and it has served the establishment well for 11 years. And it is serving it well tonight, or it was serving it well tonight, until the door opened, which it is about to do, and which will change what the evening is in the specific way that doors always change what evenings are when the wrong thing comes through them, which is completely and without the possibility of going back. They have been here for 40 minutes. The food came without ceremony. The conversation has been the conversation of two people who have found in each other something they do not find often, which is the specific quality of someone who is exactly what they appear to be, no more and no less. No performance and no management of impression, just the thing itself. And this quality is rare enough that when two people who possess it find themselves in the same room, they tend to gravitate toward each other the way certain objects gravitate toward each other. Not because they are similar, but because they recognize in each other the absence of the thing that makes most people exhausting, which is the constant low-level effort of being someone slightly different from who you actually are. John Lennon is wearing a casual jacket, and his round glasses, and his hair is long the way it always is, and he is laughing at something Bruce Lee said, the specific, genuine laugh of someone who has not performed a laugh in 40 minutes and is finding that the absence of performance makes everything funnier. And Bruce Lee is watching him laugh with the flat, warm expression of someone who said something they meant, and is pleased it landed. And the restaurant is doing its job, and the evening has the specific quality of something that will be remembered, not because anything happened in it, but because of how completely nothing happened. And then the door opens, and nothing about the evening is the same after that. The door opens, and the evening that was one thing becomes another thing entirely, and one of them will carry what is about to happen for the rest of their life, which is not as long as either of them expects it to be, standing here now on this Tuesday evening in 1972, but that is the specific nature of the rest of lives, which is that their length is not available information to the people living them. And so they sit at their corner table, and the evening is what it is, warm and quiet and sufficient. And then the door opens. The man who comes through the door is large in the specific way that some men are large, which is not only a matter of height and weight, but a matter of how they occupy space, how they move through it, how the room reorganizes itself around their arrival in a way that has nothing to do with threat, and everything to do with mass. And this man is 6'3" and somewhere around 240 pounds, and he moves through the restaurant with the specific ease of someone who has always found rooms to reorganize themselves around him and has come to take this reorganization as a condition of his existence, rather than a response to anything he does in particular. He is not drunk. He is something more specific than drunk, which is the specific state of someone who has had enough to make the usual internal restraints slightly more permeable than they would otherwise be. The state in which the things a person would normally choose not to do become available again as options, and as he moves through the restaurant, his eyes are scanning for something, and then they find John Lennon at the corner table, and the scanning stops. He does not look at the other person at the table. There is no reason to look at the other person at the table. The other person at the table is small and Chinese, and wearing simple clothes, and is not the reason he crossed the room. This is his first mistake. The second mistake is already on its way. The third will arrive in approximately 4 minutes, and it will arrive in the form of a hand. His own hand, landing on top of John Lennon's head. And what follows the third mistake is the thing that nobody in this restaurant will be able to describe accurately for the rest of their lives, though not for lack of trying, because they will try, all of them. Every person present in this restaurant on this Tuesday evening in 1972 will spend the rest of their lives trying to describe what follows the third mistake, and none of them will fully succeed. Because the thing that follows the third mistake happens faster than description can move, and leaves behind only the evidence of its having occurred, which is a large man in a different position than he was in, with an expression that communicates something profound about the gap between what you expect to happen and what actually happens when certain conditions are met. John Lennon sees him coming. The specific way a face changes when it recognizes what is approaching is a very small change, almost invisible. But Bruce Lee sees it, reads it the way he reads everything, and turns slightly to register the approach, filing the information in the place where that kind of information goes, and returning his attention to Lennon, and waiting, because the situation has not yet required anything from him, and he does not act on situations before they require something from him, which is a discipline that most people mistake for passivity, and which is in fact the opposite of passivity, is in fact the specific form of readiness that produces the kind of result that the next several minutes will produce. The man arrives at the table and begins to talk. And the talking is the talking of someone who has confused the fact of admiration with the right to its expression at any time and in any manner that occurs to them. And Lennon listens with the flat, exhausted patience of someone who has been in this situation more times than he can count, and has never found a way to end it that does not cost something. And Bruce Lee watches from across the table with the stillness that the restaurant is beginning to read without being able to name. The stillness that is not the absence of action, but the presence of everything that precedes it. And there are 3 other tables in the immediate vicinity of the corner table, and all 3 of them have gone quiet, not because anything has happened yet, but because something about the quality of the stillness at the corner table has communicated to the people at the adjacent tables that they should be paying attention, that the evening has entered a phase that rewards attention, that something is building in the corner of this restaurant that has not yet announced itself, but is announcing itself regardless, in the specific way that certain things announce themselves, which is by the quality of the silence that surrounds them before they arrive. The man wants a photograph. Lennon says no quietly, the way he says no in these situations, which is with the specific tone of someone who has had to say this word in this tone so many times that the word and the tone have fused into a single practiced unit. A unit that communicates not just refusal, but the exhaustion behind the refusal. The specific exhaustion of someone for whom the thing being refused is not a one-time request, but the 10,000th iteration of the same request, arriving again tonight in this restaurant that was specifically chosen to prevent exactly this kind of arrival. And the no lands the way it always lands in these situations, which is without effect. Because the people who do not hear the no the first time do not hear it the second time, or the third, not because they cannot hear, but because they have decided not to, have decided that their want is sufficient to override the no, that the no is provisional rather than final, that persistence will eventually convert it into something more accommodating. The man does not leave. He asks for the autograph. He is told no again. He does not leave. And then his hand moves, and it lands on John Lennon's head, and the restaurant goes to a quality of silence that is different from the silence that had been building, different in the specific way that the silence after something happens is different from the silence before it. And Bruce Lee's dark eyes find the hand on Lennon's head, and something happens in those eyes that everyone at the adjacent tables will later attempt to describe, and none of them will find adequate words for. The specific change that occurs in the eyes of someone who has just seen something that has activated the part of them that does not deliberate. And the adjacent tables have all gone completely still now. 3 tables of people who came here for the same reason Lennon came here, which is to have an unremarkable evening, and are now having the most remarkable evening of their year. Possibly the most remarkable evening of a great many years, and none of them can look away, and none of them try to. The man becomes aware of Bruce Lee for the first time. Not because Bruce Lee has done anything, because the quality of his attention has changed in a way that the man's body registers before his mind does. The specific animal awareness of something that has shifted in a space. And he turns and looks at Bruce Lee with the expression of someone encountering an obstacle they did not anticipate, and he says, "Who are you?" in the tone of someone for whom the question is not a genuine inquiry but a dismissal. Bruce Lee says his name, quietly, without performance. The man has not heard the name, or has heard it and filed it somewhere irrelevant, and turns back to Lennon, hand still in place, conversation resuming. The specific obliviousness of someone who has assessed the available information and reached the wrong conclusion from it. And this wrong conclusion is the last piece of information the evening needed, because it is the wrong conclusion that confirms for Bruce Lee that the situation has passed the point at which it might resolve itself without him. And this confirmation is what produces the most deliberate sound in the room, which is the sound of a fork being set down. The putting down of the fork is something that 4 people at adjacent tables will mention specifically when they describe this evening. 4 separate people who were nowhere near each other in the restaurant, and who all focused on the same detail independently, which is the fork, which is the sound it made when it met the plate, which was not loud but was heard, which was not violent but was final, which communicated in the specific language of objects set down with intention everything that needed to be communicated about what was about to happen next. The fork goes down. And then Bruce Lee is standing. And the standing up is 3 seconds of the most ordinary, extraordinary thing any of these people have ever watched, which is a small man standing up from a table with the complete economy of someone who has made a decision and is implementing it. No hesitation, no drama, no announcement, just the specific committed quality of movement that belongs exclusively to people who have trained their bodies for 20 years to do exactly what their minds decide without the lag that exists between decision and action in people who have not done that training. He walks around the table. 3 steps. He stops in front of the man. He looks up at him. He says 1 sentence. And nobody, not a single person in that restaurant, not the waiter who was 4 feet away, not the couple at the adjacent table who were watching with their forks suspended halfway between their plates and their mouths, not John Lennon himself, will ever fully agree on what the sentence was. Every person who was there has a different version. The versions share certain words and diverge on others, but every version means the same thing, which is that this was the last available moment for the man to make a different choice. That the sentence was an offer disguised as a statement, a door disguised as a wall, and the man looked at the door and did not see it, and laughed. The laugh is large. It fills the room the way the man himself fills rooms, with the specific expansive unawareness of its own effect. And it is the laugh of someone who has looked at the disproportion and found it funny, who has seen only the size and not what the size contains, who has made the specific mistake of confusing the container with the contents. And the laugh lasts 1.5 seconds, which is the exact duration of the last moment before everything changes. And then Bruce Lee moves. And what happens in the next 7 seconds is the thing that defies accounting. The thing that everyone present will spend the rest of their lives trying to hold in language, and finding that language is not built for it. Not because language is inadequate in general, but because it was built for things that move at the speed of human perception, and what Bruce Lee does moves faster than that. And the restaurant holds those 7 seconds the way rooms hold the things that happen in them, which is silently and permanently, and without the ability to release them. What comes out of those 7 seconds, what everyone agrees on, is simply this. Before, there was a large man laughing with his hand on John Lennon's head. After, there was a large man who was not laughing, not standing where he had been standing, not in the position he had been in, wearing the expression of someone who has just received a comprehensive and irreversible education in the difference between size and capability, delivered in 7 seconds by someone less than 2/3 his weight. The waiter who was closest told the story for 40 years and never told it the same way twice, not because he was embellishing, but because different fragments surfaced in different tellings. And the fragments never assembled into a complete picture, because the complete picture had moved faster than any memory could hold it. And this is the specific legacy of watching Bruce Lee, which is that you see it, and you cannot quite account for what you saw, and the inability to account for it is itself the account, is itself the most accurate description available, which is that something happened and it was over before you understood it had begun. The restaurant manager arrived. 2 waiters arrived. The man was guided toward the door with the specific, careful efficiency of people whose job is to move something from one place to another without further incident. And the door closed behind him. And the restaurant held the silence that rooms hold after something has passed through them. And then someone set down a glass, and someone picked up a fork, and the room began the slow process of returning to itself, carrying the 7 seconds forward in the specific invisible way that rooms carry the things that occurred in them. One of the waiters came to the corner table and asked if everything was all right, and both men said yes, and new glasses arrived, and the evening continued. And outside Los Angeles continued. And the city did not know and did not need to know And the restaurant was doing its job again, providing the anonymity that its regulars paid for, though the anonymity tonight had a different texture than it usually had, thicker and more charged, carrying something that the room's usual anonymity did not carry, which was the memory of the 7 seconds, sitting in the air of the restaurant, the way certain things sit in the air of the places where they occurred, present and invisible simultaneously, felt by everyone and named by no one. Bruce Lee sat down. He picked up his fork. He began eating again with the complete totality of someone for whom what just happened is filed and finished, and the food is what deserves attention now, because the food is what is present now. And John Lennon watched him eat for a long time before picking up his own fork. And what was in Lennon's expression while he watched was something quieter and more fundamental than his usual expression, something that had been reorganized by the 7 seconds into a different configuration. The expression of someone sitting with something unexpected and significant, and not yet sure what to do with it, except sit with it, which is sometimes the only appropriate response to significant, unexpected things. He picked up his fork eventually. He ate. The conversation resumed. They talked about music and film and the specific quality of being famous everywhere and belonging nowhere. They talked about the difference between the person you are when someone is watching and the person you are when no one is. They talked about what it costs to live in public and what it costs to live in private, and whether the two costs can ever be fully reconciled. Bruce Lee said something about water and the nature of adaptation and what it means to have no fixed form, and Lennon received it as the description of something he had just watched, rather than as an abstraction. And this is the specific transformation that seeing something true performed can work on the words that describe it, which is that the words become evidence rather than assertion, become the account of something witnessed rather than the claim of something believed. Neither of them said anything about the 7 seconds. The 7 seconds were already in the conversation without being spoken, present in the weight of the silences between sentences. And neither of them needed to name what was there, because naming it would have made it smaller, and it was exactly the right size as it was. Sitting between them at the corner table in the low light, and the 3 adjacent tables that had been watching were now carefully not watching but were aware of everything anyway, in the specific peripheral way of people who have witnessed something and are still in its presence and cannot quite let it go. They stayed for another hour. They talked and ate, and the restaurant did its job. When they finally left, they walked out onto the Los Angeles sidewalk into the warm night air, and they walked together without a particular destination for half a block, in the comfortable silence of 2 people who have been through something together. And then John Lennon stopped. He turned to Bruce Lee and asked the question. Just one word. Wait, not, why did you stand up? Not why did you get involved? Just why. The single word that contains all the other questions. Asked in the voice underneath his performance voice, the voice that appeared only when the performance had been suspended by something real. And he waited with the specific patience of someone who genuinely needs to hear the answer and is not sure what form it will arrive in, and the city moved around them, warm and indifferent, carrying its Tuesday forward. And there was a moment, standing on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, in which the only sounds were the city sounds and the specific quality of the silence between 2 people in which something important is about to be said. And John Lennon stood in that silence and waited, and Bruce Lee stood in it too, and neither of them rushed it, because the question deserved the time it needed, and the answer deserved the space it needed, and both of them understood this without saying it, which is the specific understanding that exists between 2 people who have spent their lives doing things that cannot be rushed. who have learned that the things worth doing take the time they take, and not a moment less. Bruce Lee looked at him directly, the way he looked at everything, and he answered. The answer was short. It was the length of something understood for so long that no construction is required, no assembly, no search, because the words have been present for years, and we're simply waiting for the right question. And the answer was this: because he put his hand on you. That is all. Not because you are famous, not because I was there, not because of anything about me, because he put his hand on you, because nobody gets to do that, because the size of the person doing it and the size of the person receiving it have nothing to do with whether it is acceptable, because acceptable and not acceptable are not questions of size. That is why. John Lennon stood on the sidewalk and received this, and the receiving took the specific moment that true things require when they arrive simpler than expected, because we are trained to expect the important things to be complicated, to require interpretation and context and unpacking, and when they arrive plain and direct and complete, we need a moment to understand that the plainness is not a limitation, but the thing itself, is not the absence of depth, but depth expressed without performance. And John Lennon understood this, standing on the sidewalk outside the restaurant in the warm Los Angeles night. And he nodded once, the specific nod of someone who has received something true and has no performance adequate to the receiving. And then they said good night and went their separate ways. And the Los Angeles night received them both with its usual indifference, which was the only appropriate reception, which was what both of them had come out to find, which was a city that did not know who they were and did not need to know, carrying them forward the way it carried everything, simply and completely, and without the burden of recognition, into whatever came next. John Lennon carried that answer for the rest of his life. He carried it into recording studios and into interviews and into the quiet hours of early morning when the music was not coming and he was sitting with whatever was sitting with him, and he carried it into the songs that came after. Never directly, always sideways. The way people carry the things that changed them most. He mentioned it twice in interviews without attribution or context, both times in the sideways way of someone sharing something they are not ready to fully share. And the people who knew him well enough found in those mentions the weight of something received rather than thought, something that arrived from outside with the flat, honest quality of a statement made by someone who had just demonstrated it in 7 seconds in a restaurant where the lighting was low and the menu was handwritten and the door had no sign. There was a journalist who interviewed Lennon in 1975, 3 years after the evening in the restaurant, who noticed something in one of those sideways mentions, a quality of conviction that was different from the conviction Lennon usually brought to his statements, more absolute and less performed, and who asked about it, pressed gently on it. And Lennon paused for longer than he usually paused before answering questions. And then he said something that the journalist included in the article, but did not know what to do with, which was that some things you understand because you think them through, and some things you understand because someone shows them to you, and the ones someone shows you go deeper. The journalist assumed he was talking about a song. He was not talking about a song. He was talking about a fork set down on a plate in a restaurant on the west side of Los Angeles, and the 3 steps that followed it, and the 7 seconds after that, and the answer given on the sidewalk outside, which was not about songs, and was not about fame, and was not about any of the things that the journalist would have assumed it was about, but was about something simpler and more durable than any of those things, which was simply the question of whose hand is on whose head, And what happens when someone decides that the question has only one acceptable answer and acts on that decision, completely and without hesitation, which is the only way decisions of that kind can be acted on, which is the way Bruce Lee acted on everything, which is the way he lived, which is the thing that the 7 seconds showed and the sidewalk confirmed and the answer made permanent, and which John Lennon carried until December 1980, when he could no longer carry it, and which has been traveling ever since in the accounts of the people who heard it from him, and in the accounts of the people who were in that restaurant, and in the story of that Tuesday evening in 1972, which is still being told and which will continue to be told, because it is the kind of story that does not end when the people in it end, the kind that outlasts its participants and travels forward on its own, carrying with it the specific weight of what it means to be exactly who you are in the moment that requires exactly that. Bruce Lee died in July 1973, 14 months after that evening. He was 32 years old. John Lennon died in December 1980. He was 40 years old. Neither of them knew on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, saying goodnight, going their separate ways into the Los Angeles night, that the years remaining to them were as few as they were. They said goodnight the way people say goodnight when they expect to say it again, which is simply, without ceremony, with the ease of people for whom the goodbye is an interruption rather than an ending. And then they walked their separate ways, and Los Angeles carried them forward as it carries everything, indifferent and warm, toward the things that were waiting for them, toward the music and the films and the work and the years and the specific mornings that each of them had left, carrying them forward the way cities carry everything, which is without preference and without knowledge of what they are carrying, simply forward, simply onward. The restaurant continued for 7 more years before it closed, which restaurants do, and the staff who were there that Tuesday evening dispersed into the city and the years and carried what they had witnessed with them the way witnesses carry things, which is incompletely and permanently, in fragments that never quite assemble into the whole. And the waiter who was closest continued to tell the story for the next 4 decades, and every telling was different, and every telling was true, and none of them were complete, and all of them were trying for the same thing, which was to describe something that moved faster than description, to hold in language something that language was not built to hold, to explain to people who were not there what it was like to be in a small restaurant on the west side of Los Angeles on a Tuesday evening in 1972 when a small Chinese man in simple clothes set down his fork and stood up and walked 3 steps and said 1 sentence and then did something in 7 seconds that nobody could describe, and everybody remembered. And this is that story. Not the version anyone told perfectly. Not the version that captures everything, just the version that is being told now, to you, by someone who was not there but who received it from someone who was, which is how all true things eventually travel, which is the only way they know how to travel, which is forward, always forward, from the people who saw it to the people who needed to hear it, across the years and the distance, as imperfectly and persistently as everything that matters, carrying with them the specific weight of a fork set down on a plate, and 3 steps, and 1 sentence, and 7 seconds, and an answer given on a sidewalk in the warm Los Angeles night, which is still traveling, which is arriving now, which is here.